Good evening, Trump family. Welcome to Open Source News. Have a good night, everyone, and God bless you. Alright, the following is a collection of news from Patriots. Let's get into the news. Well, I've said this before and here I am saying it again. Are you paying attention yet? Left Boyd's the sad reality is probably not, but yet again another massive betrayal. It started with Joe Biden's student loan forgiveness plan, his vote buying scam. It obviously backfired big time, not on the Biden administration, but on the suckers who thought that he was serious. And the next betrayal comes maybe a month later as Joe Biden, or should we say pro-union worker, Joe Biden, backstabs union workers once again. All he needed to do was pledge his loyalty, his absolute unshakable support during the election season. Vote for me. And then right after he threw union workers under a bus. All right, folks. So let's first start off with the backstory, a little bit of context here. For those of you guys who are unaware, over the last few months, there's been negotiations between the Biden team, the Biden White House, and unionized rail workers before the election. Joe Biden was taking victory laps back on September 16, claiming they've come to a compromise, they've come to a deal, and the president himself, Joe Biden, should get credit for averting a nationwide railroad strike that would have been, quote, crippling to the economy. Everyone listen to this. President, you have just averted a nationwide railroad strike that would have been crippling to the economy. How did you do that? And what were those last hours like in the negotiations? And Biden says, well, look, we brought business and labor together. One of the things that happens in negotiations, particularly if they've been a long game, like these have, is people say and do things where the pride gets engaged as well. And it's also hard to back off of some of these things. So what we did was just say, look, let's take a look. Let's take a look at what's happening. You have a good deal being made for labor, and therefore their income's gonna go up 24% over the next 5 years. They've worked out the healthcare piece. They worked out days off. They both sat down, in my view, and I read The Office today, saying, well, we finally figured out this is fair on both sides, and took that time to focus. And the alternative was just not thinkable. What do you mean? If in fact, they've gone on strike, the supply chains in this country would have come to a screeching halt, we would have seen a real economic crisis. Okay, folks, he took all the credit right before the election. And now all of a sudden, it seems as though the deal is falling apart. And here's the thing, Joe Biden was taking credit right before the election, crisis averted after the election. However, once things started to fall apart, once the deal started to fall apart, all of a sudden Joe Biden insists that he was never directly involved in rail strike negotiations. Well, isn't that convenient? Once things were supposedly going well, he's on 60 Minutes trying to take credit for it right ahead of the election. Then on November 24. Once it was obvious that things were falling apart, I haven't been directly involved. No, it's been my team, probably hoping none of it falls on him. Well, the deal completely fell apart. And now the rail workers were planning a massive strike, which I believe was supposed to be scheduled for this week or possibly last week. And well, pro-union Joe takes action. Why, quote, Union Joe chose to make it illegal for rail workers to strike. Want to know how worried Washington was about a rail strike? Typically reliable union champions Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi successfully rallied rank-and-file Democrats to side with railroad executives over their workers. You read that correctly. Biden decided the broader economy was a bigger priority than 100,000 freight rail workers having any paid sick leave in their next contract. After campaigning as the most pro-union presidential candidate in history, Biden signed into law a measure that makes a rail strike illegal. Listen, left Boyd's Joe Biden is not pro-union. He's not pro-student. Joe Biden is only one thing, and pro-Ukraine. What a slap in the face to his voters. Railroad workers fighting for paid sick leave is too much and too expensive, but sending billions of dollars to Ukraine. Well, that's okay. How stupid is that? This coming from the guy who's constantly going on and on and on about how he's the most pro-union president of all time, essentially just told rail workers to go F themselves and made it illegal for them to strike. If they strike, they are now criminals. That is a crime. Unionized rail workers are responding. And some significant news, I very often think about the end of an empire. If you look throughout history, there's all kinds of different empires that have been the world's superpower for certain periods of time throughout history. And there's one common denominator with all of them. At one point, they've all fallen, crumbled. Some people like to say, well, history was different back then. And now it's different. They say the same thing with recessions, by the way, but I'm not sure if I buy into that argument. I'm not sure if I buy into that idea. Who's to say that this empire is gonna last forever? Whether it's the Western civilization empire, the American empire, sometimes I feel like we're reaching the end of the empire. And the one thing that always pops up in my brain over and over again is the loss of our morals. We as a society, as a modern liberal, secular society, what are we? Who are we? What are we? When we lose our values, when we no longer value tradition, family, and most importantly, when we no longer value human life, when we view it as expendable. Well, that's an ethical conundrum that continues to pop up in my head, and today more so than ever, and I'll show you guys exactly what I mean as Canada continues to lead the race towards absolute left-wing secular craziness. All right, folks. There's no other way to say it. Gateway pundits got it right. Sick. Canada offers veteran and former Paralympian assisted self-ending when she asks for a stairlift. A Canadian veteran and former Paralympian said last week before a parliamentary committee that she was offered help with assisted self-ending when she asked for a wheelchair lift to be installed in her home. Retired Corporal Christine Gauthier, 52, who competed in the 2016 Paralympics in Rio de Janeiro, revealed to the committee on Thursday that a caseworker from the Veterans Affairs Canada VAC had offered to provide her with a medically assisted self-ending kit. According to Fox News, the event happened during a phone call with the VAC where Gauthier described her deteriorating health. Quote, "I have a madam we can offer you medical assistance in dying," Gauthier said in the hearing before the House of Commons Veterans Affairs Committee. Well, this is essentially where Canada is going. Is life too hard? Are you facing financial hardship, depression? Are you in need of assistance after an injury? Well, we got the trick for you, a medical self-ending kit. What in the world is going on? I mean, people are always going on and on about how amazing Canada's system is, more free healthcare, free everything, despite the fact that you're literally paying for it in taxes, especially if you're a high earner. I guess from what we can see here, it seems like the system is falling apart to the extent that they're willing to start implementing taking someone's life as a medical alternative to treating and caring for said individuals. You know, there was a whole lot of foreshadowing to this. Here's an article from January 23, 2017. From the CBC, which is Canada's state broadcasting network, medically assisted deaths could save millions in healthcare spending. Report across Canada Journal calculates up to $136.8 million in savings. Oh, would you look at that? Oh, wow. $136.8 million in savings. I mean, that's amazing. Is it really? No, in terms of government spending, $136.8 million is peanuts. I mean, let's really put it into perspective. November 14, 2022. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced his additional military assistance for Ukraine and additional sanctions against Russia today at the G20 summit in Bali, Indonesia. The Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced that Canada will provide $500 million in additional military assistance for Ukraine to assist armed forces of Ukraine in defending their country against Russia's brutal and unjustifiable invasion, totally willing to spend $500 million. And that's on top of hundreds of millions of dollars that's already been spent without even a second thought sending it to Ukraine. But $136 million to help treat and care for people, your own citizens, can't be bothered. This is the type of stuff that makes me think that we are lost in the Western world. Where have our priorities gone? And, you know, it takes me right to my views on abortion, which have really developed over the last couple of years. I've always been a little bit libertarian when it comes to social issues. I don't really care, let people live. It's their decision to make. Of course, within reason, I would never be able to take the stance that Democrats are taking up to 9 months now. But the more I start to realize that a lot of these ideas coming from the left on some of these cultural and social issues are predicated on totally immoral logic, this disregard for human life, or this disregard for basic responsibility and well-being of a society, family and children, the more my stance starts to develop, and frankly, the more it starts to frighten me. Where are we going as a society when we don't value tradition, when we don't value family, when we don't value the conception of children, where we think that liberation and freedom is just irresponsibility, and using medical procedures to end life? Of course, in this case, in the womb, Where are we going as a society in the Western world when we see people who are suffering, when we see people who need help? And our response is, well, maybe we should set up Futurama style, self-ending booze, being a little bit facetious, a little bit hyperbolic. But you get the point. That's essentially what this is. And this, to me, is what I'm most fearful of, because the more we go down this direction, the worse society is getting. Things aren't getting better. Culturally. Of course, we're living through unprecedented time when it comes to wealth creation, the economy, mainly due to all of the new technology, but culturally, it feels like society is falling apart. And then we have our enemies and our adversaries running shadow operations. To make it even worse, let's look at TikTok. For instance, the Russians and the Chinese Communist Party are loving the degradation of our values in our society. They're using TikTok to promote it and to shove it in our children's faces because they can clearly see the effects as negative for our society moving forward with all of these leftist supposedly compassionate moral standards and beliefs. Society has become more divided, more extreme, children are more vulnerable, I'd argue their more unsafe mental illness is absolutely on the rise. We're seeing an unprecedented rise in young male anger as well, which is leading to some of these mass casualty events. People are feeling ostracized or feeling like something is just fundamentally wrong. Substance abuse is skyrocketing. People are depressed overall. When you look at the health of society, when you look at the health of the individual metrics to calculate general mental health, how people are feeling about themselves, and of course, about society, everything is going downhill, and it's going downhill fast. And you can't convince me that these woke liberal secular ideas don't have something to do with it. I'll be completely honest with you, I made a bunch of different people. I have a bunch of different friends, my girlfriend's friends, we live a very traditional happy life, all of our friends, but all the people that we know that are busy being woke, all the women that don't need no man's strong independent boss, babe, that kind of thing. These are all of the most miserable people that I know. For instance, even some of my mom's friends, the ones that never started families, the ones that bought into the whole career first narrative and idea are some of the most depressed and most lonely, and we have these metrics when it comes to the political spectrum. People who are buying into the woke secular nonsense are much more unhappy than conservative traditional people who started families, and it's all tied in our collective ethical code has become essentially lack of ethics, that there are no lines. We don't draw lines in the sand anymore. That's racist, that's sexist, that's misogynist, and it's leading to anxiety, depression, and general societal chaos. Leftists don't seem to value anything before, and I know that because if leftists can't even value the sanctity of life, then what can they possibly value? Thank you for always watching and subscribing to the channel. Every channel subscribe is my motivation to work harder.